So yeah, thank you very much, Julie. I enjoy coming up here. This is my 4th year displaying the castle for the Jamestown and Scandinavian Festival in Columbus, Ohio. And so I'm basically the, if I hazard to say, the United States aficionado on Tre Kronor Castle. And this all came about as my own interests. I'm a commercial interior architect by trade, so that has led to this. I was an exchange student in Sweden, and I have always been very interested in architecture and Sweden and history, so this is right up my alley. So we're going to talk about, this says, can anybody read what this says? Yep, Old Castle, Tre Crowns. So this is the Tre Kronor Castle, and it gets its name from the element up at the very top, which was the Tre Kronor Castle. So let me see if I got a little pointer, but
It's got the money and the
exactly.
crown itself.
All of that is from the Tre Crowns. Yes. Now, who can tell me what the Tre Crowns mean? Any guesses?
Father, Son, and Holy Ghost?
You would think, but no.
The Trinity? No.
No. Any other guesses?
3 regions of Sweden?
3 regions of Sweden. That is one very good guess. And in fact, no one knows exactly what it means.
Trick question.
But one of the things is that it's the 3 regions of Sweden, which is the Svea, the Göta, and the Norra. So the 3 parts of Sweden. Other people say that it is the 3 lands of Sweden. When Sweden was at its largest, it owned part of Finland, it owned part of Sweden, part of Norway. So it's kind of ambiguous. No one exactly knows. The other thing is, you'll learn here in a minute that Sweden also owned a part of Poland.
Really?
Yes. So it's a little ambiguous as to what, but you know that the 3 crowns is a symbol of Sweden. And this is the Norrland, Svealand, and Götaland, and then the Swedish Empire. You know, during this age, all that green was Sweden. So it was quite pervasive. But the 3 crowns actually predates even the empire. And here is the only painting of Tre Kronor Castle, and it's in 1660. And picture, you can see sort of the way that people are dressed. This is about the same time as the Pilgrims. So now, how many people have been to Stockholm? Raise your hand. Okay. Have you seen the Royal Palace? So this view is this today.
What a... No.
Yeah.
Did it burn?
Yeah. Spoiler alert. So, but no, this is what the exact spot is today. And they replaced the old castle with this Barock Palace. And way down here is where they created the 3 Crowns Museum, because after this palace burned down, that was really the only part that was remaining, is the cellars down here, because everything else was up above the ground. So. But I don't know if you've been to the Armory or the Treasury or the other museums that are also at the palace. So in this museum, you can learn about some of the artwork and the designs and remnants, and you can see the vaulting down in the cellars, and that's a well that was part of the kitchen at one point. And they have models there, and I love models. I've always been a model builder, and so I was like, oh, give me the kit so that I can make this model out of paper. And this is what they gave me. This is all that they had. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to make my own. So such began the 5-year journey of research and learning about Tre Kronor Castle. Now there are parts of it that do remain, but most of it is gone. lost to history, but archaeology, they can find some things, some parts of the castle. So if we actually go back in time, this is what basically Stockholm looks like now. This is Gamla stan, or Stadsholmen, as it was known in the day. And this was the entire city. But as we go back in time, you see something changing. What's changing? The shoreline is actually changing. And then here is the castle as part of Gamla stan. And continuing back in time, the city walls protecting the medieval city, back to 1300s, and then all the way back to the 1200s. That's when Stockholm, 1252 is the earliest record of Stockholm. So, and at that point, what's so important about Stockholm? Well, has anybody been out in the archipelago? Yeah, gorgeous out there. Well, the archipelago is actually the inlet to all of this water here, which is fresh, and this, which is salt water. So there's this little mouth, and the Vikings had this as their holy land up here. So this was a very important inlet. So they built this castle to fortify that inlet, protect it. Agnefit was the name that they had for this little Viking village on Stads. This is the island of what's now Gamla stan, but it's Agnefit was a little fishing village, they believe. And they created that castle keep up on the highest part of the island. That's a defensive mechanism because it's what's called a castle, and you put it up on the highest part so that you have the high ground during attacks. Birger Jarl was the founder, and this is what they believe the main castle keep looked like in that time. And not very impressive, but you gotta start somewhere. So again, Stadsholmen, way back in 1252 when it was founded. Then they started creating walls around the city, and they built up around that little castle keep, and that's what's called a ring fortress. So the ring fortress is putting a ring around the castle keep, or what's also called a dungeon in French. That's the word for castle keep. And then it became a castelborg, or burrow, if you know the word. That is actually a courtyard type enclosed fortress. And this is 1440. This is what they believe it looked like back about then. So here we have the Three Crowns Castle Keep. Right there is the entrance into the entire thing. Besides, there was one other entrance here at the lake. But that's basically the fortress that you're dealing with. So you can see the shaded portion down at the lower portion is that dates all the way back to 1440s, so it's quite old. Now the very first depiction of Three Crowns Castle is in this, actually you can call this propaganda, created by Gustav Vasa about the Stockholm's bloodbath. Anybody know what the bloodbath is about? The bloodbath, exactly. Anybody know what this is about? So, back in 1400s, I think it was 1400s or 1300s, I have to check that. But the Norway, Denmark, Sweden all made the Kalmar Union. So they were all part of this. Think of it as a, what's the thing now with Mexico, Canada, America? No.
NAFTA.
NAFTA. Think of it as a NAFTA thing. So, well, that puts everybody under one king. Well, this king from Denmark came to take the throne of Sweden, and Sweden was not all too happy about it, and so they sort of put up resistance. Well, the king says, okay, I'm going to squash this. Everybody who's against me, off with their heads. And so that's what happened in the Stockholm bloodbath. And also, one of the persons that were killed was the father of Gustav Eriksson. Anybody know who that is? That is the real name of Gustav Vasa. Gustav Eriksson. So, and this is the first depiction of the castle. However, it is very inaccurate. It's almost, there's no resemblance to what's going on here other than it's placed here and Storkyrkan is there. And it's really not an active depiction of it at all. So Gustav Vasa, like we said, he was part of the uproar in Sweden, and he was elected to be king after Sweden decided to no longer be part of the Kalmar Union. So Gustav Vasa, that is his seal over on the right, having the Vasa is a bunch of reeds, so that's his symbol. And let's see, the next depiction of the castle is actually a very accurate depiction, even though the actual painting has been lost. This is a replica of the painting. It's called the Stormaktstiden, and it's called a sundog. It's an astrological phenomenon, which is lights appearing around the sun. It's called the sundog.
I've seen sun dogs many times.
Yeah.
And moon dogs.
Yeah.
But never with multiple rings all together at the same time like that.
There must.
I think that's
It has to
wonderful.
do with ice crystals in the
Right.
atmosphere that cause these refractions.
I never had a circle within circles, and
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. Now, they did things in the medieval times, I know,
Yeah.
that were different, not true renderings, I know.
Right. But they also were, it was a mystical thing at that point. But here, this painting you can see in Storkyrkan in Gamlestan. And the castle is rather accurately depicted here behind Storkyrkan. This is Storkyrkan in its medieval garb. So it wasn't changed. It was renovated later to look the way it does now. But you can see the castle keep and the walls and everything around there. So that's the first accurate depiction. Here is a map, which is called the oldest map of Stockholm. It was actually created in 1620, but to represent 1547. So we get an idea of what the footprint was for Three Crowns. And actually, Three Crowns affected Storkyrkan in a significant way. At one point, Storkyrkan actually had a choir off the back of the church. But Gustav Vasa was so worried about defenses against cannons that he was going to have the entire church demolished. But luckily, they talked him down off of that, and all they had to do was get rid of the back part of the choir. So, Stockholm, the Three Crowns affected the side of the building itself. Brown and Hogenberg created these etchings in 1588, which give a very accurate representation of what Gustav Vasa created as the Three Crowns Castle in the fortress. It's a really interesting compilation of a variety of different architectural styles and times, and it's really difficult for us to admire what they were doing because we think of a building as 50 years and it's lost its prime, tear it down and build something else. Well, they would just build on and build on and build on and build on, and so it's just this organism that grows with all these different styles. So after Gustav Vasa, his son Eric the 14th was crowned in 1560. He went mad, and basically Johan III, his brother, his stepbrother, but his brother took over, and there's a lot of family drama, a huge interesting story about all this stuff. But we don't have time to go into that right now. But Eric and Johan both greatly increased the beauty and built up the palace. Here is Johan III's funeral depiction. So they don't have pictures, so they make etchings. And we get an idea of the inner courtyard and some things. There's some inaccuracies in this. For some reason, they put this little, we'll talk about this, Karanap later, but it's not located there. It's not on the inside, it's on the outside. So, but for some reason, this is Johann III's grave, and I love this artwork. It's called strap work, and it's a medieval or Renaissance, Northern Renaissance style. So you can imagine the castles and palaces having this amazing artwork in their halls and everything.
Question.
Yeah.
It does, what you have it back there, it looks like, you can see the straps, they're like metal, right?
They're plaster.
Oh, plaster?
It's all plaster, but it looks like leather straps, yeah.
It looks like straps, but they do that with plaster. I don't know,
Yeah.
plaster frames though, you need to.
It's brilliant. I love it.
How they did that?
This is my favorite depiction of Three Crowns Palace in 1636 by an unknown artist, but it's just ethereal and impressionistic, and I really enjoy what it's depicting of the Three Crowns Palace. There's not a lot of detail, but it's a lot of romanticism. And actually, this image is part of a 4-foot long image. So it's this panorama of Stockholm. Another panorama was done in 1650 that also has a depiction of Three Crowns Palace. And here we're seeing again stewardship down here in the front, and then we have the palace. You can see that Johann III has actually added floors above for the palace to make it even grander. I mean, of the castle keep of Three Crowns. So you can see how it has changed over the years. Just to give you some perspective, again, we have Johann III, Sigismund, and then Karl. These are all children of Gustav Vasa. Then we start getting into grandchildren of Gustav Vasa. And Christina Gustav is one of the famous queens. There's an interesting, I'll talk about her movie, Greta Garbo did a movie about her once, and I'll talk about that a little later on. To give you some idea, this is what's going on in the United States, guys. We're just settling Jamestown. And here they're building these huge palaces. Jean de la Valliere was a French architect that was brought by Christina to the courts, and he did a lot of, this was a proposed improvement of the palace to make it more in line to what was going on the continent, and he produced the only remaining architectural plan of the palace that exists to this day. This is the only drawing that we have of an accurate representation. And down here at the bottom, you can see a scale. Those are in ulnar. Ulnar was the distance from the inside of your elbow to the outside of your wrist. That's an ulnar.
Makes sense.
Yes, this is all before the metric system. And in one of my later trips, after I created all of this, I found out what all this is about. I was like, what, did they tape something on, or what's going on here? And it's really a flap of paper that you can fold the flap back and see the floor below. So that was fascinating to learn. So I started with that floor plan. This is Karl X's, Gustav's funeral march. And up at the top, that's how long this entire piece of artwork is. And it's in the Royal Armory. And it's 14 feet long. But in one part of it, you can see the palace in its 1660 form. It's actually, it dates, what's depicted there is after 1660, but. Okay, now the most famous artwork for the palace was done by Erik Dahlberg, and it was called Swedish Empire and Moderna. Anyone know what that means?
Sweden, or old Sweden?
Old and new, Sweden, old and new. And it's basically, you can think of it as a tour book of him. You know, the printing press is just coming to play. They want to create something to show the greatness of the Swedish Empire, and so they had commissioned this book by Erik Dahlberg. He does gorgeous, gorgeous etchings and artwork pieces. It's a bit of a propaganda itself, but he actually has a statue on the Royal Palace. So one of the statues out on the outside of the Royal Palace is of Erik Dahlberg. These are some of his depictions. Did you guys know that Stockholm had quite a few Arc de Triomphe?
Quite a what?
Arc de Triomphe. The one that we know about in Paris, Arc de Triomphe.
Yes.
Stockholm had them too. They were building them for celebration of anything. And here's another wonderful depiction. You're standing about where the National Museum is, looking towards the Royal Palace. And then Guvert Camphusen is the famous painter who created this painting. And I got to see this in person. It's only maybe 2.5 feet long. It's tiny, but the amount of detail in it is just incredible. So I'm starting with this. So in before 2013, I started drafting this in the computer, and creating it, and researching it, and doing all of it. And then I created this computer model, and then I printed it out, and from there I made the paper model that you may have already seen in the hall over here. And that is my masterpiece. I call it my child. But this is an idea. Gamla stan is on the right. Swedish Parliament building is right here today. To give you some idea. I got to play around with lighting to show what it might have looked like at nighttime. And we're going to start with August Strindberg's Svenska Folkets depiction. And I'm going to take you now on a quick virtual tour through the castle. And so we're starting first at the Porthuset, or the gatehouse. So at one point, this was the only entrance into the fortress, and it had a drawbridge. And the drawbridge would be similar to something you would see like this. But once the threat of war became less medieval in nature, the drawbridge was taken away and just replaced with. Now, Vad Stanislav, has anybody been there? This is a pier castle. Gustav Vasa had it created to protect the from the south. And this castle actually has an entrance port that was mimicking the gatehouse of Tre Kronor. So we can get an idea. This one exists now, but we can get an idea of what it looked like. And they were creating a bunch of, like I said, the printing press had just come about. Italians were putting out books. De Architectura was a famous book about classical architecture, and so they used that to supplement all of their architecture that they're creating up in the northern part of, in the northern Europe for the Northern Renaissance. Willem Boy was a famous Dutch, you can't really say architect, you have to say artist, because at that time period, everybody did everything. Not everybody, but it was a true Renaissance. You painted, you sculpted, you did architecture, and it was very much a craft. It wasn't documented. Even shipbuilders did not draw their ships. They just said, this feels about right. Well, they'll learn that sometimes is a mistake. But, yeah. But this grave monument is for Gustav Vasa, and it's in Uppsala Cathedral. And on either side of the gatehouse, we have a lion and a wyvern. Anybody know what the wyvern represents? Remember I was talking about them owning a part of Poland? This is the part of Poland that is represented by this. It's sort of like a basilisk. It's a mythical creature of some kind. And that's represent the, yeah. Not quite a griffin, but yeah. So once we get through the courthouse, oh, and I've got a big treat for you guys at the end. My office has now virtual reality rendering software. So I have taken my castle and created a movie that we're going to actually drive through the castle. And so it's a full motion, realistic tour of the castle at the end of this. Anybody know what these things are? They're wall anchors, right. So you're building the wall out of stone, but you're using wood to go horizontally. So the wood has to be attached to the stone, and so you use these wall anchors. And these wall anchors are very specific for time periods, so you can actually date a building by what the wall anchors are telling you. Now, here's the little map up in the right-hand corner. So this is the gatehouse. We're going to the left first. And inside this little courtyard here, it's this gorgeous little, it's called a carnap. And we don't really have a good term for it in English, but oriel or bay is sort of similar to that. These buildings here, this was the Treasury building and some other buildings out here. Here you can see, this is a depiction of that etching from the 1580s, and you can see a whole bunch of these carnaps on the side. Anybody know what they're about?
Just observation is like a bit of.
Yeah, some were a watchtower function, like especially on the corners. Gunpowder, maybe. This building right here was actually called the Laboratorium, where they were experimenting with gunpowder and creating gunpowder. They wanted to keep the gunpowder out of the palace because it would explode. And they're still learning how to control this stuff. But in Finland, there is one of the pier castles for the Three Crowns still around, and it has these carnaps off the side of the building. Still any guesses? It's the outhouse. Exactly. There is no indoor plumbing. Everything is going out the walls, down the walls. So it is called the garderobe, or wardrobe. The term wardrobe actually comes from this because they could, I've seen conflicting things, but they would use the smells to actually keep the insects away. So therefore you would hang your clothes in the garderobe because the moths would not want to be in there. Interesting. So, but I would not want to be the person whose job it is to clean up the pile at the bottom. And
Looks like it goes into the water to me.
Sometimes it goes in the water, sometimes it doesn't.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this particular carnap is not an outhouse. This one is a true luxury bay window. I mean, basically, you can it's your special room. And I think it's just gorgeous for this. And this is Johan III's special carnap. I can see him just using this to think and enjoy it. And on the very top are his initials, IR. Actually, it's Latin for Johann, the king. Now then, on the other side of the gatehouse, we have this area, which is the gardens. And the gardens has the stairway that goes up along the side. And last year I was in Paris, and the Paris palace had something very similar to this. And that house right there that we're headed towards is actually right here. And the painting, you can see it right here. And we've got the ornamental gable. We've got this garden here, which is their private gated garden. That's their high garden, they call it. And we actually have one of the only remaining things from this palace is a little bench from that garden. Now up here you can see little structures. They had a menagerie of creatures. So these are little pens, cages for birds, rabbits, foxes, what have you. And right next to that is that building, which is really the badstugan, or the bathhouse. Now the bathhouse is a very important thing. Other than bathing, you're doing a lot of political conversation, you're eating, you're having merriment, you're even doing other things that we're not going to talk about. But so the badstugan was a very important thing during that time period. Just behind the badstugan, you can see this gorgeous ornamented gable that is very Dutch in its architecture because it was done by Willem Moy. Yeah. Here you can see it. They had the motto Deus Protector Noster, so God protect us. And we have 3 statues that we know that these statues were actually the 3 statues were Justitia, Prudentia, and Fortitudo. Anybody know what those are? Justice, prudence, and fortitude. Exactly.
Quality and callous being leadership.
Yeah, that's the French. That's right. Now these are not the actual statues. Two of these statues are actually from the Antwerp Staatshuis in Belgium, which was done by Cornelis Flores, who is the teacher of Willem Boy. So we can use this to represent what Willem Boy would have created. And actually, Kalmar Slott, again, back to that castle, replicated that ornamented gable on the ends of its both of its gables. Now, there's this really interesting thing in the painting. Anybody know what this is about? Lion's Den. This is the lion's den, actually. During the, I think it was the Polish War, one of the wars, they were gifted to lions. So they brought them to the palace, and this is where people can pay money to see the lions. And it's a really interesting story because once the lions eventually died, because Sweden's not very forgiving for lions, they turned this into the first theater in Sweden. The very first dramatic theater in Sweden was Lejonkula. And in fact, if you go to the Royal Drama House in Stockholm, they have a small stage called Lejonkula in honor of this very first historic theater.
The Rose Theater in Sweden.
Yeah, exactly. Similar to that. So here we have Gustav Vasa's tower, and this is his private little study. This is a depiction of one of the rooms. Now, if we want to start to see what's inside the castle, we really have to go to another pier castle of Kalmar. Has anybody been to Kalmar? Okay.
Yeah.
Question?
Use the term pier castle. I don't. What's that?
Pier castle means that it was existing and constructed at the same time. It was a pier to. It was a sister castle, a brother castle.
I think it was P-I-E-R.
No, not out on a pier, right? P-E-E-R, right?
Okay,
So Kalmar was it was actually, the Kalmar Union was signed in this castle. And so that's where the Kalmar Union gets its name, because of this castle. This is in the southern part of Sweden, and at one point this was close to the boundary between Denmark and Sweden. Well, this castle this was actually created by Eric, and here is his bedroom with amazing artistic walls, plasterwork painted on the ceiling, inlaid wood. It's just amazing. This is the gray hall where they would have had their dining. We've got frescoes on the walls. We've got a cassette. It's called a cassette ceiling. And you can see what's going on the windows. This is the most amazing ceiling I've ever seen. And it's in the gilded hall in Kalmar. And it's just an amazing ceiling.
I've never seen some ceilings like that on our old anchor banks downtown.
Yeah.
In the ceiling.
A coffered ceiling?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And in the old post office, there was right downtown Jamestown on 3rd Street.
Right.
I remember as a kid.
Yes. And then this is a gorgeous little room in Gripsholm. Has anybody been to Gripsholm Castle? This is Hector Karl's kammer, or his chambers. And in Gripsholm, you can see the painted stucco ceiling and how they built the furniture right into the walls. And it's just gorgeous. So that gives you an idea of what the interior looks like. Now we're in the grand courtyard. So we've just gotten into the big courtyard. These are some early sketches by Eric Dahlberg of what the castle looked like. And here we can see the final etching. Does anybody notice some people around here? This is actually marketing at its best, because it's trying to make the castle look even more grand and large by shrinking all the people.
Trickery about
Yeah, propaganda, exactly. Gustav also was very big on propaganda, actually. Well, here's the gatehouse. So we went through this way, and then here we're in the big, great courtyard. This is the Hall of State, and this is the stairway that you would get to the Hall of State. And so you would use this stairway to get up. This is the crowning of Christina, an etching of the Hall of State. It's aggrandized as well. It's not quite as large as what is depicted here. In fact, someone made a model of it in the Three Crown Museum. And that silver throne is one of the only surviving pieces of furniture from the Three Crowns Castle. And I was telling you about Greta Garbo's movie, where she actually portrays Queen Christina in the movie. And they used a movie prop to be this silver throne. And the famous thing about that silver throne is that that movie prop was used later for the throne of the Joker in the very first Batman movie. So if you watch that movie, you'll see a depiction of this throne as the Joker's throne. So now we're back out in the courtyard, and you'll notice the structure right over the stairway. It's called a baldachinum, and these were very much the sign of the times in the Netherlands. This is the city hall in Gouda, and you can see a very similar structure as the entrance to the Hall of State. And right next to the baldachinum, we have a decorated frontal piece saying Bona causa triumphant. And the good cause. Does anybody know who Sweden's biggest enemy was during this time period?
Denmark?
You would think. Denmark was almost the biggest.
Russia?
Yes, Russia.
The
Russia.
Rus.
The Rus. Russia was the big foe. So this is against Russia. And to either side, once you get up through the baldachin, you have this trumpettergången, or the heraldry way. It's where people could be seen and walk around this gorgeous little space. And in Poland, castles, again, Sweden owned part of Poland, so they're going to be sharing architectural techniques. This castle has something very similar. All of these steel bars were added later when the structure is no longer supporting itself, so they had to supplement it with these steel beams, steel pipes. So once you're up here, there's actually, remember the castle was created up on the highest part of the hill? Well, there's actually, we were down here, so we got to get up here, and there's actually this stairway to get up to the high part of the courtyard. And once we get up here, we're in the very most courtyard, controlled courtyard. And I was telling you that the castle keep was built on, Gustav Vasa added 2 towers, and then Johan III added 3 more floors on top of that. And this is what you might see when you were standing up in the tower, looking down.
Lightning rod?
Those are finials. Some of them are lightning rods of some kind. Yeah,
They get to have a connection to the ground then.
probably.
Do they understand that then?
I think so. That's a good question. I do not know the answer.
They look like it, but
Yeah.
it's just pure ornamentation.
Looking back towards, so here's the baldachin and here's the castle keep. And these are the new royal apartments. So remember, Gustav Vasa's apartments were in the old part of the castle on the left. And so the kids want their own wing, and so they build this wing, and it's got the royal apartments there. And these apartments were all decorated by, we're not using stone in Sweden because stone is too expensive. We're using brick. So almost everything is made of brick, and then they cover it with stucco. And then you put this, it's called sgraffito, which is basically graffiti or a fresco in the stucco on the outside as decoration. Now, Johan III did something very innovative in its day. You have to remember, electricity does not exist. Where are you getting your light from? The sun, windows, or candles, but you do not have any other light sources. So your windows are very, very important. So most of the time, there was a window on both sides of the rooms. Well, Johan III decided to create a private corridor so that you're not walking through his living quarters in order to get from one end to the other. So most of the buildings in this time period did not have this private courtyard that we take for granted today because we have artificial lighting. And this window seat on there's where you would read or study because you got the natural light from outside. I love this depiction of, this is much later. This is actually in the royal palace of today, in their the royal chapel in 1778 for the crowning. But even then, you can see all of the white that you're looking at is burning oil, burning candles, burning up on the ceiling. Those are pans of burning oil, creating light. So you can imagine what was going on.
A lot of smoke to tarnish the paint.
Exactly. All of these churches were just totally sooted up.
Oh, man.
Everything's going on. You can imagine the dangers. Think about in your home today, everything that you have that is electric is flame. Your iron, your cooking, all of that is flame. So you can imagine the fire danger of what's going on here. All right, so here we have the royal apartments over here, and this is the northern face, or the northern wing, and this is the entrance into the royal chapel. And we've got a gorgeous emblem at the very top of this spire. Anybody know who this is? The three letters are the first three letters of Jesus' name in Greek.
That's Christian.
Exactly. So this is the three first letters of Jesus' name. So that is what is on that great emblem up at the top. Now we've got the royal chapel down here. Remember Gustav Vasa, it was inspired by Wittenberg to reform the church against the Catholics. And he actually did it so that he could get all the money. So he could take all the money from what the Catholics had in his country and use it to do whatever he wanted with it. So he made a state church. Well, Johann III was married to a Polish princess who was Catholic. So he actually had a Catholic church installed above the royal church. Quite scandalous for the day. This is St. Jacob's Church, which was built about the same time period, so you can get an idea of what the royal chapel might have felt like. And we even have some of the columns from the original chapel as part of the museum that they have tracked down once they were transported to other buildings. And the chapel has this gorgeous outside window artwork. This is a similar recreation in Kalmar Slott, again, outside of its chapel. And outside on, this is exterior face, and we have Psalm 134 talking about, again, just very Christian-related things on a royal palace. Wow. Now here, we've got the courtyard. We're almost out of the palace. But the Kanslilängen, which is more the administration wing, if you will, but inside, on this wing, it had a lot of the decorations similar to Oxenstierna Palats, which is just outside the palace today. But here you can see a theater done by Christina. It's a ballet theater that was put into the palace at that time. Very similar to what you would see in Czechoslovakia. Then we have this ramp leading down to the seaport. So this is how they got all the supplies in and out of the palace, other than the land entrance. And down on the docks, we've got one of these ships here in 1628. Anybody know what ship that is?
Awesome.
It is the Vasa. Remember I was talking about how no one writes anything down or figures it. It's all rule of thumb and just sort of loosey-goosey about building ships?
We didn't really plan it on papyrus.
It was a craft. They just said, oh, this feels about right. Well, Gustav Vasa, the Vasa ship, unfortunately, was not built correctly, and it sunk on its maiden voyage after it was appointed here at the docks. And here's what you would see if you're standing over, this is Skeppsbrunn, or Skeppsholmen. So this is the shipyard across the way. It's now the naval. Now in 1697, May 7th, the palace burns to the ground. Now there are many, many fires. You know how much fire is going on inside this castle, right? But at some point, it just becomes too great and it torched and scorched and burned almost the entire building to the ground. Now it's all made of brick, but the interior is all wood and flammable fabrics and wood and things that are going to burn. So here you can see the baldachin, because so the outside wall's already, down, and this is a depiction of it. And this made quite a lot of news all over Europe. And in fact, this is from a German newspaper, and they used the early engraving as their representation of the palace. But do you notice something weird here? All these, what? That is water. How are people walking on water? And it's in May, so they're not ice. So they just use this depiction, and so it's a little bit of a fallacy. Again, not much was rescued from the burning of the palace, the silver throne, and this is Hedvig Eleanor's desk. And Nicodemus Tassin was actually he was creating the new palace, and so this was a new wing that was created, and it's the only part that survived the Three Crowns fire. It was torched on the inside, but for the most part it survived as far as exterior walls, so you can still see that part today. That's the part that faces the Parliament. But now we've got this Baroque palace that was created, and this is the royal palace of today that you're seeing.
What was that? The new palace?
The new palace was started in about 1700s. So 1700 to 1750 was when that was being built. And it is a Baroque palace. If you'll notice, what I enjoy about the previous, the Kalmar Slott, is that it had a verticality to it because it was the Gothic verticalness that I like. This is Baroque. Baroque is all about horizontals. And it's about order. It's about controlling the world. And so you can understand why they built what they did. I don't like it, but okay. Now in 1897, the World's Fair was in Stockholm. And they created, among other things, Gamla Stockholm to represent their heritage and their history. And so they built a 1/3 replica of the Three Crowns Palace. And you can see it in different forms because this is the earlier form versus this is the later form. And they could walk around. Then you can see that the proportions are off and things are just not looking the same. But here on the right, that is what they built, and this is the actual size of the palace. And you can see this is laid over the existing royal palace. Now, also another remnant of Three Crowns is in Stockholm, the City Hall, and they used a lot of the Tre Kronor Castle imagery and architecture, if you will, to build its heritage version of a city hall. And up at the very top, they put the Three Crowns symbol in its own form up at the very top. Now, Prince Carl created his own little fire screen back in 2010 that if you wanted for, I think it's like $2,000, you can watch Three Crowns burn once again. And that is your tour of the old castle of Three Crowns. And if you would like to stay for a second, I can just show the movie real quick. And so this is a brand new, you were the first people to see this video of All right, so this is, we're starting again from the painting image, And we're going to walk around the outside of it. It moves slow at the beginning, but it picks up here eventually. Let me see if I can max it. But you can see it's a dry moat on the right side. And it was interesting that they actually had people living down there. People would build homes and little places to stay down into that area that they knew if there was a war, they would get burned and whatever. But here's the gatehouse to the city. And over here is the livery, or where all the horses and stables were for the castle. And you can see the Cardinal there for Johan III. And the stone way for the bridge, and then the drawbridge going into the courthouse, the gatehouse. They covered all the brick again with stucco, so you're not seeing white brick. It's really plaster covered brick. And again, this is my imagination of how it would look. So there's that courtyard through there. Then there's another courtyard here over on the right. This was the gardens. So you would go this way. All of you see niches against to the right. That's where all the cannon ports were, and they would use that to protect the castle. All of these quarters were used by soldiers and guards. You're going to go back in, and then you're going to head into the big courtyard. So you can imagine the royal carriages arriving with the dignitaries. And then we have the royal apartments on the left. The kitchen was actually in this area. The chapel entrance there in the front. We have the ramp headed down to the wharf. I didn't talk about it, but we'll get to see inside that other courtyard there. There's the royal apartments again. I'm sorry for making you dizzy. There's 3 crowns of power. Now the word dungeon and keep are the same thing. It's just that the keep was the oldest part of the castle, so nobody wanted to be there, so that's why they would put the prisoners there. So that's how dungeon got its name, or its connotation as being the jail. Because there's no windows, it's old and dank. Here you see Trompettergård, Trompettergången, and then these are the stairs going up. And this part over here on the left was the oldest part of the living quarters for the castle. And that was the main entrance for the dignitaries in the State of Hall. The Hall of State, which is this wall here that we're seeing, was built later. So actually this courtyard was twice as large. The Hall of State took up half of the courtyard. So before Gustav Vasa, this was the living courtyard that they would use. And we're going to head back down, and then you can get to see the outside. There's another, to the right is the other version, the other part. Sorry, I just created this, so I have to fix that little glitch. So down these steps, then we're going to go up to the right, and it was. Remember, this castle is more or less a city, and so it has its own brewery, it has its own bakery, it has its own blacksmith area, you've got to have lots amount of wood stored for fires, all of that stuff. And this here is basically the working courtyard. So this is where the brewery would have been, the blacksmiths, the wood, all of that stuff would have been in this courtyard here. You're going to get to see something that no one has ever seen. This part here, in all of the depictions of the castle, is this ruins of a tower that no one knows exactly what it looked like, but I found an engraving that had a suggestion of what it looked like. This is the royal dining rooms up here, with the balconies off of it. And once we leave this, that's the end of the movie outside of this courtyard. My rendering software, this actually took 12 hours to render this movie. And so I had to leave before I could get the rest of it rendered.